Dear Barakala Torah Kula Live, welcome, good afternoon. We're about to launch into a new series of halachas. The halachas of Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Sefer Torah. And today's going to be a very exciting hands-on shir. I'm also very excited to host this shir in my office where I work throughout the day. This is in honor of the very special campaign we're running for our cheder. This is where I live my time and educate Talmidim, little boys, to Torah v'yira. And whoever didn't get a chance to join, please, the link is going to be added to the group and to the description. And please join our campaign. I want to dedicate this year, Le'ilui Nishmas, a very unique and special chassid, a role model for the entire Dor Hashvi. Harav HaChassid Repin Yakor for Repinchas Bereb Yeshua Al Vashalom. I was zeichet to learn with him Chavrusa, and he has educated a Dor Yesharim of Chassidim, Oivdei Hashem, in Dor Hashvi. As the Mashpia in Oli Torah, Mashpia in 770, a whole, where all his Talmidim, and we're going to jump right into the halachas of Tefillin Mezuzah Sefer Torah. And before we begin the halachas themselves, the Rambam is going to introduce which biblical commands, which biblical tzivui mitzvahs there are in these halachas. The following halachas, Dr. Rambam, Yesh b'chlon chamish mitzvahs. The halachas, they are all rooted in 5 positive commandments of the Eibishter. Vizel Pratan. The details are Li Yos Tefillin Al Rosh. It says V'hoyu L'Totavos Beinenecha. V'hoyu means it just needs to be on your head, meaning that it doesn't require a ma'isa. It just the etzem exists there. Therefore, the Rambam puts it first, seemingly, even though in the pasuk it says Kshatim L'Yisayidecha and then V'hoyu L'Totavos Beinenecha. But V'hoyu, as the Ragat Shaver says at length, it expands on this. It should be tefillin on his head. And then there's the positive mitzvah of lekashram alayad, to bound the tefillin to one's hand. Gimel, the third mitzvah is lekvoy mezuzahs bepischei sha'arim, to affix mezuzahs at the openings of our gates and our private homes. And Daled, the fourth, lichtav kol ish sefer Torah la'atzmai, every man should write a personal sefer Torah for himself, or in today's day and age, people sponsor towards printing Sfarm, there are poskim that include that as well, or towards the Sefer Torah, or to be even Magia Oisachas in the Sefer Torah. And then there's a second mitzvah. Hey, lift of a Sefer Sheni Latzmai. A king has to have a second Sefer Torah written for him. Kadei Shila Shnei Sefer Torah. He should have 2. One, Bebeis Gnazov in his treasury, and the second that he carries all the time with him. Obeir Kol Mitzvahs Elu Beprakim Elu. The explanation of these 5 biblical mitzvahs will be expanded on throughout the following prakim. Perek Rishon. The first Perek, Halacha Aleph. Arba Parshiyos Elu, the 4 Parshiyos that we will find in our Tefillin, Shal Yad and Shal Rosh, Shehain, the following, Kadesh Li, one should sanctify for me, Kol B'chor, and V'hoyu Ki B'yacha, when they shall bring us to the land, Shebesei for Be'el Shmois, and Shema, right? Tashihir Wizal Hashem is 1, and V'hafta, and V'hoyim Shemoya, that is Kabbalah Sol Mitzvahs, Hein Shenichtavis B'fnei Atzmon. They have to be written for Shal Rosh, each one on a separate parchment, and then they will surround it or plate it, cover it with hide. Tefillin, that's what will be called tefillin. And you put it on your head. These 4 parshas are what we put in a bias, or the Rambam calls it mechapin, and then we bound it to our hand. Even one tip of a yud, and this is not specifically only of a letter yud, rather every ois that a specific area in the ois gives it the distinction. For example, a beis, the fact that it's sticking out in the back, that gives it the tzura of a beis as opposed to a chaf or a reish, right? What makes it different, differentiate between it and a dal, is this back yud. Any such part of the letter that will make the distinction between one ois and its other, that will passel it if one can recognize, as Ram is going to expand in the last halacha the last 2 halachas of today's perek. Now, me'akev es kulam min haTorah. He says even one tip of a ois, it will be me'akev for the entire Torah to be passel, invalid until it's fixed. Only by a Sefer Torah can you fix it afterwards, because a Sefer Torah doesn't need to be written kisidron in its order. The way Masha'enki and Tefillin, if you made a mistake, you'll have to erase all the way back because it has to be written kisidron. And if there's a Shem Hashem, in which case you can erase, so you're going in. Next parsha. Now, it's ma'akiv in a Sefer Torah, and in every Sefer Tefillin Mezuzahs, ad shu nichtavos Shleimus Kitikunun, until every letter is written complete, the way it should be affixed. Halacha base. The same thing applies to the two of these four parashiyos which are in the mezuzah, Shema and V'hoya. Even one letter of these two parashiyos, if it's missing a tip, and again, like I mentioned, one that will differentiate between the will make the distinction to make this a proper ois different than all the other ones. Biblically, this will hold it back from being kosher. Adshu shteim nichtabos shleimus. Both parashiyos are written b'shleimus. V'chein sefer Torah shechitz afilu ois achas pasal or sefer Torah that's even missing one ois is invalid. Pasal. Now, halacha gimel. Asara dvarim yesh b'tefillin. There are 10 details in tefillin that are halacha l'maisha misinai. They're Torah shebal peh, but of a higher caliber. We've accepted it all the way down from Torah misinai. Not that we learned it Yud Gimel Midas. The kulon ma'akvin. Each one of them, if it's lacking, it invalidates this tefillin from being kosher. If you change one of them, our tefillin still is right now. They are currently invalid. Shnaim heim b'ktivasam. 2 of the details of these 10 are in regards to how they're written. Ushmoina b'chipuyon. 8 of them are connected to how they're plated. They're covered as tefillin. Ukshiras utzoysen, and how their knot is tied. We'll see the knot that connects it to the hand and to the head and to the hand. Now, elu hashnaim shebiktzibazam. What are the 2 that hold it back from being kosher in regards to writing? The first thing, it's written specifically with yoy, ink, b'shiu nichtavim ala klaf, and they have to be written on parchment. Now, the Rambam is now going to take us through this wonderful overview of how ink is written, how ink is prepared, and the Rambam is going to describe the way it's prepared in his time. Listen closely, some practicalities. I want to thank Rabbi Oldtime that gave me an opportunity to visit his whole underground, his beautiful production, how he does it, and open his doors also to my school and prepared a beautiful video that I'll also share soon. So the way the Rambam describes, they did Joy in his time in Fustat, probably in Cairo, was then called Fustat, the capital of Mitzrayim. Now, Egypt. How would one make ink? Mekabtzin ha'ashon. They would gather the soot. Basically, if you take a fire and it's burning something that's not just clear, what happens is that if you put a piece of glass, that is going to collect all the black over there, and that black, like dust, that's soot that they gather. Oishel zephes, whether it's burning, it's what's the soot from oils, or zephes is tar, shel shiver, wax, whatever it is. They would mix it with a sap that comes from a tree. Ubema'at dvash. The sap that comes, not like maple, it's much thicker. I think they called it Arabic gum. It's like a much thicker. It comes from acacia wood, I think. And veloises and oisai harbe, and they would mix it well. Vidochin oisai, and then they would crush it together, together with this syrup. Vidochin oisai hachiaso rikikin, and they patted it down until it became so thick it became like little plates or little strips, and they dried it. So right before you need to use it, then they would dry it, they would put it on the side. Now, but what do? They would take mea fatzim. Mea fatzim is, you find it in California. It's interesting, fascinating. A wasp would make a hole in a tree, and then what would happen is the tree would produce like a whole bubble, like a whole wart, or like when it's a grafted tree, like the tree grows around that hole, and it's called a golnut. They would cook it, and that turns into this golnut would turn into mea fatzim, and this mea fatzim was like brown water. You're allowed to write with that, or that's what they would use also to mix it with the ink itself, with the soot, and turn it into diyai. The primary din is that it has to be able to be erased. On one hand, it has to stick to the cloth when you write. On the other hand, it has to be erasable. It's the best, the choicest way to write on Sifrei Torah, Tefillin Mezuzos. If you wrote directly with mea fatzim, this golnut water, or the calcantum, it's called calcantum, I think in Latin it's Shu oimid vein nimchak. that is not erasable, it's still going to be kosher. However, if this is true, that you could write it basically with anything. So, what does it mean? What is the Torah limiting when it says that Allah has to be written specifically with ink? What it's limiting is the color. That it should not be it can't be red or yorek, which is generally understood. The Rambam's yorek is understood to be blue or maybe green. The Ketzben. She'im kasav asfarim or betfilin mezuzos. If he wrote a sefer Torah tefillin mezuzos, afilu oizach avshamin itzivayin in other colors, even if he was fancy enough to write it oy bezahav arei elu psulim. That's what Allah came to exclude. Now, the Rambam is now going to explain which hide is allowed to be used to make life very simple. I'm going to introduce it first in advance and how we do today, and then we'll see in the Lashon Rambam. This is, let's assume, this is the hide of an animal. The red is where the meat is, and this is the skin, and over here there's the fur. If a person takes this whole one piece and decides to write on it, it means he scrapes off the hair from this side, and obviously he's going to take off the meat. This unit is called gvil, and you can only write it on this side, and it's only kosher for a sefer Torah. Then there's another option. You can split it into this gvil can be split into two, and then what you'll have is the part that's going together with the hair, that's going to be called klaf, and the part that's together with the closest to the meat, this is called duchsustus. And duchsustus is only kosher to write on it a sefer Torah. Klaf, you could write on anything. Well, we'll see in a second. So duchsustus, this part and the klaf part, you're only allowed to write inside. So this outer layer is called klaf, and if you split it into two and you're writing on klaf, you have to write on the inside. If you're writing on duchsustus, the one that you're allowed to write, which is only sefer Torah, you're allowed to write it only also on the inside. Okay, so we have, this is gvil. This, if you split it into two, this one's going to be klaf, and this is going to be duchsustus, and it's only mutter to write in the middle. Today's day and age, just to put it out there, in today's day and age, where did I put my chasra props? Today, they don't spend time on splitting it. What they'll do is they'll just take the whole gvil and they'll shave it down so much on the side of the meat that it's considered klaf. Like there's nothing left from that whole side. And b'meila, it's like klaf, and you write it on this side. So if you see your average sefer Torah, it's going to be, you have, this is the side, the back. This is the side where the hair is. And this is the side on which we write. It's called klaf, either because they split it into two and this is the outer side and you write it inside, or because they shaved off so much. Okay, now let's see it inside. And we are now in halacha vav. Sholish oider saying there are three types of hides. Gvil, we said when they're all together, they're one unit. Uklaf is if you split it into two, and the outer one is klaf, and duchsustus is the inner one. Ketzav, loichin or behema chaya. You take the hide of an animal, or a behema, a domesticated animal, or a chaya, a wild animal, but that's kosher, as we'll see. For example, a deer, and the like, bison. The first thing is you shave off all the hair. They would salt it with a lot of salt. The reason they would salt it is that it should take out the softness, so it should be able to be right on. It shouldn't be stretchable, which should break the oisias. And the melech helps also take off the hair. And afterwards, they would do it with this mea fotzin, with this gold, not water. The kayotze boy. Things that shrink the hide and harden it. That's if you do it all in one piece. Now, if they take the skin after they took off the hair, they split in the width. They split it into two parts. This gvil, this one piece of hide, as the tanners do. There's the thinner one, which is on the side of the skin. One is thicker, the side that's closer to the meat. And they obviously processed it with salt, and afterwards with flour, and afterwards with this golden water, it's very acidic. The side that's on the side of the here, that's called klav. Now I want to point out, the Rambam doesn't even mention the whole sid, which is a whole nother process that we do with lame, and it burns the whole neshama out of it, and therefore it makes it white. In the Rambam's time, the Sifrei Torah weren't processed that strong, and therefore even the klav, it was soft and a little bit hairy. And that's why if you look at the old ancient Sephardic Sifrei Torah, they did it the way the Rambam described, just with mei afatzim, with this water, and therefore it's like brownish. It's brownish, and you could feel like on the hide, like here. It wasn't done with the lame, or with like we do it with lime. Halacha ches. Now halacha l'maishem mesina shiu koisum sefer Torah ala gvil. Sefer Torah could be written on the gvil when they're all one piece. The koisum makayim haseir, and you can write it on the time of the seir. Vishu koisum atfilin ala klaf, and tefillin can only be written on the klaf, which is once they split it, the outer one. The koisum makayim basar, and they write it on the klaf, the side that's facing the basar, as we said. So let's say if you split it into two, this is the meat side, this is the klaf, and on the inside where it's facing the basar. The chol koisum ala klaf b'makom seir. If you write on the klaf, sorry, whoops. Vishu koisum on mezuzah al duchsustus. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. A mezuzah only is allowed to be written on the duchsustus, on the inner side, and this also you only write it on the side that's facing the seir. The koisum koim seir. The kol koisum ala klaf dim koim seir. If someone writes on the klaf, for example, right? We said that film should be written dafka on klaf. If he writes it on the outside, on the side of the seir, he wrote it on gvil, which we said only sefer Torah could be written on gvil, and he wrote tefillin on it, or ubadachsustus. He wrote, let's say we said you're allowed to write, you're allowed to write a mezuzah on the sustus, but he wrote it instead of the side, the side facing the here, he wrote it on the side facing the meat. Apostle, this is in Balas. Halacha l'maishem mesina. This is how we write. Halacha test. Even though this is accepted halacha, which was transmitted orally from Sinai, im kasav sefer Torah ala klaf kosher. If he did write the sefer Torah on klaf kosher, even though we said that's just tefillin should be written on klaf, everything is kosher al klaf. When it says that tefillin should be written, that sefer Torah, tefillin should be written, sefer Torah should be written. Could be written on a gvil, that's to exclude duchsustus, but you're also allowed to write on klaf, which is also like gvil. Shem kasav ala sefer pasul, if you write on duchsustus only by mezuzah. Chenim kasav as a mezuzah ala klaf or ala gvil kosher. There also a mezuzah will also be kosher on the other two. Chiddush is lo yamru al duchsustus el mitzvah. It's kind of tell you that the mitzvah we have in Menachem Sinai is best to write the mezuzahs on duchsustus, on that part that's close to the meat, on the side facing the here. Now halacha yud. In koisvin svarin tefillin mezuzahs, we don't write sefer Torah tefillin mezuzahs al gabe oir behemot tmeya, on the hide of what animal? It's not allowed to be written on a treif animal. The oir v'chayet tmeim, or fowl, or a non-domesticated animal, wild animal. That's tummy. Can write it on a rhino, on treif birds, on a stalk. Aval koisvin al gabe oir behemot v'chayet oif tohoidim. You're allowed to write it on sheep, on goats, on deer, or behema obviously, and chaya that are oif, and even chickens in Indian. They don't need to be shechted to be kosher. They don't need to be edible. They have to be, the min is kosher. But even if neveils died on its own, or it was tarif, it was fartzuk, killed by a different animal, it's kosher to write on it. The ein koisen al gabe or adagatar, even if it's a kosher fish, bass, chveis, still possible. Why mipnei azuma? It has a smell and it has oil. She'ein azuma poseches bibuda. Even through processing it, it doesn't take away the dirtiness of it, and therefore we don't write on it. Now, gvil shel sefer Torah. We said the gvil is when they're all one piece that you're allowed to write a sefer Torah, or klaf shel tefillin on the outside. When you're processing, you have to do it lishma, with intent that it's going to be for a sefer Torah kosher. The im ibdan shaloi lishma psul, and if they were processed shaloi lishma, they will be invalid. Laficha, for this reason, im ibdan akusi. If a goy did it, psul, and it's possible from kuta. Afal pisha marna loy lakusi laabed oyer zel l'shem hasefer or l'shem atfilin. Even if you told him in advance, you told him, please make sure you have this and this in mind. Still doesn't help you. Why is that? At the end of the day, he's doing it based on he has a mind of his own and he's going to do his own thing. Loyal das so he's not thinking about the person that hired him. Now, leficha, for this reason, called over should talk ma'isa l'shmoi. This is a rule of thumb. Anytime it requires a ma'isa with intent, with kavanah for l'shem the eibishter, imasaw akuti. If a guy did it, possible it is invalid. The mezuzah, however, ain't a tzichabad l'shma. Interestingly enough, a mezuzah does not need to be processed l'shma, and in that case, it's going to be kosher. Halacha Yud Beis, just to exaggerate a drop, so you get the uniqueness of this halacha. In Inyan, you could go into a tanner, a guy that's making leather, and you find out which leather came from a kosher animal. This came from a behema, and this brown leather, maybe you may try to make it white. You could even write the mezuzah could be written on duchsustus. So you say, oh, this is a piece of leather. I could write a mezuzah on it. Just make sure it's not the side that's on the side of the flesh, and you're good to go. Now, Allah a Sefer Torah and a mezuzah must be written with lines that are pre-scraped in. So you write it misuda as opposed to tefillin. But tefillin and tzrichim sirtut, while being that they're coated, they're covered, and they're concealed, people don't see it, it's okay. Another difference between tefillin and mezuzah to a Sefer Torah, that tefillin and mezuzah do not need to be that you read it from a written form of a Sefer Torah and then you copy it. Right about Shakol Goyis and Parshas Elo, everyone knows this parsha by heart. Aval Sefer Torah aslach afilu oisach shleim aksav. You're not even allowed to write one letter if you're not copying it from a different written version. Halacha Yud Gimel Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzah shechsavan apikoiris. Heretic yisarfu, they get burned with the askaras. Ksavan kuti were Yidden, that they were Geirei Aroyis. They weren't considered Yidden. They wanted to be Yidden. They lived in Kuta. Some Cheir mixed them up. Or Yisrael Mummer, or a Yid. That's apostate, right? He's Mummer for one Aveira. Or a Moiser, Biyad Anas, someone that gives over Rechush that belongs to Yid, to a forceful person to take it away from Yid. Or Eved, or Isha, Katan, Harelu Psul, they are all puzzle. Biganzu, and however they get, unlike an apikoiris, in these cases, we do them the due honor of bearing it. Shnemar ukshartem uchsaftem. Why the Torah puts them together to tell you kol shemoza alakshira o mamin ba. Anyone that has been commanded to write and or he's also commanded and he also believes in it. Who shekais, if he's the only one that's valid, his writing is valid. Nimtzu biyad apikoiris. What happens if you don't know who wrote it? You found it in the hands of apostate. Yiganzu, in that case, it gets buried. If they're found in the hand of a kuti, then you could rely that they're kosher. Don't buy for more than its value, even though we said it can be considered rightfully kosher. We don't want to get them used to stealing it from a yid in order to turn a business out of it. And Halach Yadal. If he wrote it on non-kosher animal, or animal or hides that were not processed, or they weren't processed, yeah, or processed it is invalid. There's no such thing going in and buying by a tanner like a mezuzah. Halacha tezvav, or if it was from non-kosher animal, the leather. Halacha tezvav. Hakoyis Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzah. If he writes Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzah, b'shas ksiv lo hoysel kavan, didn't have any intent. He wasn't thinking. He's just writing. Because of askar ben askar shavahen shaloi l'shman psul. And if he wrote also Shem Hashem without the kavana, possible lefichach. Therefore, hakoyis Hashem afilu melech yisrael shor b'shloim, being that he has to have his mind has to be davik in the kavana, the Eibishter's name that he's writing, even if the Melech Yisrael comes by and asks him, how do you do? Lo yishivenu. You're thinking about the Eibishter, don't respond. If you're planning to write 2 or 3 shemois, you're allowed to stop between them. But you're not Hashem Elikim, for example. You're writing in Sefer Torah, sometimes it comes up. Hashem Elikim, you're not allowed to, in the middle of a shem stop, but you're allowed to stop between them. Masik v'neim meisher, honestly, fascinating ma'aser. The Rebbe once told as he that had a health problem. And we know the Rebbe sees top down. From Ruchnis to Gashmis, there's a problem with Gashmis, it starts with Ruchnis, and the Rebbe knows how to be Mechav in which Aveira or what he needs strengthening in which mitzvah. So I've told the person, check your tefillin mezuzahs. There's a problem here. And he checked, it's kosher. Not only that, it was new. He bought it from a seicher that only took from Yerushalayim. So he wrote back to the maskiris, it's kosher. The Rebbe writes again, but the problem doesn't go away. The Rebbe writes again, you have the tefillin mezuzahs, biggest tefillin mezuzahs. He decided he has to get the grunt of it. So he asked him who you bought it from. He went to the seifer. The seifer says this, he asks him, he says, everything is b'kedusha v'tara. What are you talking about? You know that I went to mikveh before every shem. So he says, how do you do it? You go to mikveh 5 times? Says, no, I left out all the shemis, and then I go to mikveh and I fill in all the shemis. One shot, so it's before all the shemis. And that is possible, l'mahadin. There would be no way in the world to pick it up. He fixed it, and the Eibishter fixed his gashmis as well. Rebbe. Okay. It's just reminded because he says if you're writing Shloisha Shemis, I pointed out you're talking about the case where it's written Hashem Elikim, for example. Not yeah. Okay. Weiter. Halach Dazayin. Hatoivos. My props. Listen closely, everybody. Okay. Here we have feathers. The way they're done. If Rabbi Levi, you could zoom in. This one's not 30 with the way it's written in a proper way. It's written on a slant. The top sticks out a little bit, so you could begin the letter, stretch down, and then pull. Right? That's how the letters are written. Make a line. So that gives you, this is just the practicality. Make the line, and then you stretch the wide from the line, and you pull. Now, what happens is, so that's why it's cut in the middle. And then when you dip it into ink, it's going to slowly pour out from where it's stretched on, along those lines, like a calligraphy pen. The problem is if you write the first ois, you're running a risk, because when there's a lot of ink here, it may not just drag along the line at the end. It may just driplet down, and then it's going to be a blotch, and it's not good. So therefore, never begin a new dip with Shem Hashem. Start with a different letter. Let's see it inside. A person dipped a kulmus, the feather, into the quill. 2, write the Eibishter's name. He shouldn't start with the first letter of the Eibishter's name. You're allowed to start with the letter that's part of Shem Hashem, but it's not. That means it's like Ba Hashem, Le Hashem. It's a connected. It's a kidoimis, but it's not the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, Shachar Lichtav is Hashem Kuloi. Very interesting. Once upon, it's not the minig today, you'll never see it in a Sefer Torah, but once upon a time, there was an option to write, like when you're writing a essay and you forgot a word, you make like a little V and you add it on top of the line or under the line. There is such an option in a Sefer Torah. Zokter. If Shachar Lichtav is Hashem Kul, he forgot to write the entire Shem Hashem. He's allowed to add it on top or on the bottom. Again, this only works for a Sefer Torah when it doesn't need to be written Kesidron. Because if it needs to be written, considering you have to erase all the way back and then add it, you may as well add it in the line. Aval miktsas Hashem bashito or miktsas etalo. No, it doesn't help. You can't write half inside and half upward because you forgot to write half of the shame. Even if it doesn't need to be written considering or off the line, it doesn't work. You can't above or below. Aval miktsas etalo puzzle. Now b'shara tevasim shalchach. All other words kaisav miktsas teva bashito miktsas lamaila. Some could be above. Yeah. You can't even hang one ois. You forgot one letter. You write from the new. You should know that if you decided to erase it back because there was no Shem Hashem and you're allowed to erase it. Shem Hashem, you're not allowed to. If you erased it, you're allowed to write Shem Hashem on the place where you erased. Where you scratched off. Now, what happens? You finish writing Sefer Torah Mezuzahs, and you should know it's nicker. It's Shvertz first time. They had Kfitzas Haderech. They had it's called Kfitzas Hakolmus. In those days, they wrote Sefer Torah Mezuzahs. They wrote so quickly. I mean, that's how they wrote everything. So just how we write script, they knew how to write. It's nicker that they wrote speeding. So it was still, they wrote the end. The beginning was still wet. So you're not allowed to leave it like this, that it shouldn't get dusty. No one should stand, no fly should stand on it. You can't turn it over. It's not b'chavadik. Rather put a zakter. Either you roll it, or you fold it, or you cover it with a beged, but you're not allowed to turn it over. Halacha yitches. Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzahs. Sha'amar HaSefer Achash Yatzun Tachas Yada. Can a Sefer, after he finished writing a Sefer Torah Tefillin Mezuzah, can he be Moitzi Laz and invalidate it? Say, it wasn't really done properly. I didn't think the Askaras Lishma. For example, he says, Loikos Afte Askaras Shabban Lishma. I didn't have the Askaras L'Shem Hashem. Einoi Neman LePoislam. He's not believed to invalidate the Tefillin or Sefer Torah that he wrote. Aval Neman Ulapsed Kol Schar. The only thing he's relied upon is to lose his paycheck. Ava say, why? Why would we not allow him to passel? Maybe he's saying the truth. I didn't think the Abish's name about the Abish's name when I didn't do the Shema. So maybe his intention was, I'm going to say that I didn't write the Shem Hashem properly. And his intention is, I'm ready to shoulder and to shoulder the loss of all the Shem Hashem to pay me a little bit less, but the parsha is going to be kosher, so I'll get the schar. That amount, we believe that he may make such a mistake, and he doesn't like the guy, so he says, the askaras weren't proper. He still have to pay me. I wrote everything else l'shma, and he invalidates it, but still, yeah. He thinks in his mind the only thing I'm losing out is the wages for writing the askaras. If he said about a Sefer Torah or Tefillin, in which case you need the oiros, the hide should be Me'ubed Lishman. He didn't do it Lishma. In that case, then Neman, in that case, we're in line because he knows he's not going to be making anything. In the same way that he's believed upon to lose all his wages, Neman LaPaslan, he is Neman to pass the literary. Everybody will know Shem Ein Oiros Mubad and Lishman Ein Sachar Klal. He knows he's not getting any wages, so you can't say no. He thought that he's gonna get. He didn't. He really did have the proper Lishman. He's just trying to passel him. Now, and everybody would know that because you're writing your cipher, so you would go take from a kosher person because everyone you need a lot. Now, halacha your test. Ein kaisen tefillin and mezuzah. A tefillin and mezuzah are only allowed to be written b'ksav ashuris, which means in the holy tongue, in the square nusach of Stam. V'itiru b'sfarim lichtav api yivanim bilvad. In Sifrei Torah, they only allowed another language, which is in Greek, but it had to be written in the exact nusach of Greek, in the exact right translation. It's called Yafta Lakim Yefes. The Eibishter, so to speak, Yishkam Bal Hashem, that the Yefes, which is Greece, they were able to be between the Yid. However, says the Rambam, it's not practical. Shekvar Nishka Yevanim in Olam. The proper language has been lost. It's a way to write it. V'nishtabish. It got mixed up, but and got lost. All three are only written in Ksav Stam and Lashon Kodesh. Has to be very careful when you write. Here's another Allah. Each letter has to have all around it mukav kvil. Has to have white all around it. So no letters allowed to touch another. If you don't have white of cloth from all sides possible. A child that's not overwise and not overnourished, if he's not able to read it, puzzle. It's not legible. It's not legible for him. It's not considered an ice. One has to be very careful with the shape of the isis. A yud shouldn't be too long. That for your average child, it should look like a vav. And a vav shouldn't look like a yud. It's not sticking out enough or not sharp enough, so it doesn't look like a base. Don't make them too similar. The Chenkates are all the similar ices. Now, I do want to point out, if you have made such a mistake, let's say the yud is stretched a little bit, and you ask the average child, it's not like chacham leisachal, the right age, and he said it looks like a yud. At that point, you can cut it down smaller because it already has the ice yud, and it's still going to be mukav vil. Now we won't have the problem. The final halacha for today: if you have hide that has a lechel, a hole inside, do not write on over this hole. However, you should know what's considered a hole. Minute. If the diyoy veris olive, it stretches across it and will maintain its shape, and you won't see it dripping in, it's not called a nekav. You're allowed to write on any hide that was processed. What happens if you already wrote it properly? You wrote it, there was no hole, and then some kid with a needle made a mistake, he made a hole. Now, even in the middle of the oisius, that means in the white part, kosher. Nika biyorich, or even in the middle of the ois, if it still has the tzuras ois, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Nika biyorich ois, by the foot of the ois, until it's, so to speak, separate. Part of the foot is cut off. If, let's say it's the tough, okay? Let's look at it over here. Let's say this is the vav, and the Menachem split the vav in the middle. If above the split there's still kimloi ois ktana, it looks like a ois, then you're still good, and you could even connect them back if you could. Kosher. Providing that it didn't start looking like a different ois. If it got cut off in the middle of an aleph, and there's no tzuras aleph in it on each side on its own, it's not good. And you go to a Sefer Yerushalayim, you buy yourself new ones. Anyone that touched any Sefer about the Lubavitcher Rebbe knows tefillin is negeya to a person's thought process. A person that's depressed, buy a new pair of tefillin. Should be most mahoder possible. If there was a problem in anything, many times tefillin, mezuzahs, the Rebbe said to check. This was the go-to. And because Shomer Dalsis Yisrael and the V'yarum Mimeka and the Elu Tefillin Shabarosh, thank you so very much for joining us for the Perek of today. Dear Chabura, going through Kol HaTorah Kula live with the Rambam and Ali, the entire Torah Shabbat. Thank you so very much to the tech team led by Reb Levi and Nimravsky, Le'ilu Nishmas Hezeda, Harav, Reb Pinya, Harav, Reb Pinchas, Reb Yeshua. May his neshama have aliyah, be made this year for the entire family, and may us continue, all of us continue learning and living by his shining example of Avodas Hashem and Avodas Hamidus and Limda Torah. Looking forward to see you next year.